A dust like this is like silence to the musician, a blank page for a writer, a blank canvas for an artist. While many will use this setting for the advancement of journalism to boldly confront the challenges of the world today or warp the minds of fearful viewers into radical hatred, that's not what this piece is about. The focus here is for those who see that blinking red light and choose to be, for lack of a better word, silly.
Let it go! Let it go!
Behold!
Let your tongue explore your face.
Are they simply entertainers, or are they responsible for informing and shaping what we, the people, believe?
Often comedy can really point out, comedy theorists will talk about comedy as sort of drawing our attention to certain expectations that we tend to have, but then upending those expectations. The idea that we have kind of a set of cognitive schema for how we move through the world, and that when that gets disrupted in some way, that we get pleasure out of it because it's training our brain to be more intelligent. We're recognizing that we can't always expect, that if we drop this glass, the same outcome will happen. Maybe one time it won't break, or, normally a hole's not here, but now suddenly a hole is here in this road, right? It's sort of training your brain to be more flexible and adaptable. So I think some people would say you could apply that usefully to, political, to forms of engagement with politics and government, because they're really kind of allowing you to see some of these contemporary events, but then, note a sense of sort of strangeness or defamiliarizing within that framework, right? Noting that there might be a contradiction in what someone says, or that there might be an unexpected parallel or connection between, a politician's behavior and criminal behavior, or another particular type of comparison that they may not have expected. So I think having that sense of kind of mental flexibility can really be useful for being able to kind of make more connections in politics than they normally would or might.
Even a person that isn't that interested in politics could still get exposed to information about it. So I would say that's probably the first thing that comes to mind. And then the other thing I would say is, most of the research on public opinion and how it's formed points to the role of what social scientists would call elites, as people that have a big platform, people that are either hold elected office or are celebrities or experts that have access to media. So political comedians, could be part of that. That public opinion is generally led, rather than, it's not usually the case that elites are responding so much to public opinion as leading it. And so that could be another place where satire and, political comedy comes in.
Are the jokes just jokes, or are they more impactful than they seem? These are the central questions we'll be exploring in this documentary. And in order to weigh all of this, we must go back to the beginning.
From New York, the world's fair city, The Tonight Show, starring Johnny Carson.
In an era where the nation sought refuge in the glow of television screens, Carson's Tonight Show became a sanctuary for all. A mirror reflecting the societal zeitgeist with a stoic demeanor and a well-timed punchline. Carson not only entertained millions, but also subtly wielded an influence that resonated beyond the laughter, shaping public opinion in ways both profound and understated.
You know what the official theme song is, the Democratic Convention? Did you read it in the paper today? They took Hello Dolly from the musical, and they're going to do it to, Hello Lyndon. Yeah, they're going to do a whole thing on that, which is smart. I mean, if you're going to choose a song for a Broadway musical, that's the one to take. And who would want What Kind of Fool Am I? It's not...
Johnny Carson was so widely popular in part because he didn't get overly political that often. And I think his political humor was, pretty subtle, and often, would jab at people from both political parties. He wasn't like a partisan comedian. I think you contrast him with somebody like Jon Stewart that had a very clear point of view and, advocated that, and increasingly over time. But I would, my recollection of Johnny Carson was that that wasn't really his approach. It was more of a, poke fun at all sides, but not take a partisan position. And I think that contributed to his longevity and popularity, because he didn't alienate, a third to a half of his audience.
While he mentioned the politicians, he was not abundantly political. I mean, why would he be?
Are there things that really bug you that you can't say in the air?
You're going to get serious, aren't you?
A little bit.
I think one of the dangers, if you are a comedian, which basically I am, if you start to take yourself too seriously and start to comment on social issues, your sense of humor suffers somewhere. I've seen other people, whose names I won't mention, who do humor, and then somewhere along the line they start to want to make their views known. I try to do it humorously. I try not to, and we've had some criticism on the show. Some critics over the years says, well, the show has no great sociological value. It's not controversial. It's not deep. The Tonight Show basically is to amuse people, to make them laugh.
Do you get sensitive about the fact that people say, he'll never take a serious controversy?
Well, I have an answer to that. I said, now, tell me the last time that Jack Benny, Red Skelton, any comedian, used his show to do serious issues. That's not what I'm there for. Can't they see that?
But you're not...
Why do they think that just because you have a Tonight Show that you must deal in serious issues? That's a danger. It's a real danger. Once you start that, you start to get that self-important feeling that what you say has great import. And strangely enough, you could use that show as a forum. You could sway people, and I don't think you should as an entertainer.
To be apolitical was simply not an option anymore. Amidst the deepening division of the late 90s, there emerged a palpable yearning for the moral compass in the cacophony of partisan disdain. In this morally dire time, a yet unseen luminary would step forward, offering humor and a salient perspective that echoed the collective need for clarity and moral grounding in the face of an increasingly fractured society.
January 12th, 2012. From Comedy Central's World News headquarters in New York, this is The Daily Show with Jon Stewart.
Somebody like Jon Stewart took a much clearer ideological position. I'm not sure, if you ask the average American in the 1970s or 80s, is Johnny Carson a liberal or conservative or Republican or Democrat? I'm not sure that they would know. They'd probably project their own views onto him, somebody that they liked and was funny. But I think, with Jon Stewart and others now, and Seth Meyers is probably in that category, that it gets very clear where they stand. They're funny. They have, clever takes on current events and the news and stuff. But at the end of the day, pretty clearly where they stand. So I think that, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I'm not sure. But it definitely changes who their audience is and can be, right? Jon Stewart's audience was limited by the choices that he made about what to speak to. But then again, he still had a huge audience. So it's not like, it's not like that he was struggling to make ends meet or anything. But so I think as far as, setting a precedent, I would say that he probably established that taking stronger political positions and, disproportionately making fun of one side rather than the other, you could still be successful with that. And so, I would think that people that have followed him, saw that and were probably less concerned about being perfectly balanced all the time.
Stewart's comedic pulpit not only entertained, but also addressed the collective hunger for candid discussion on pressing political matters. In this shift, viewers discovered a cathartic blend of humor and insight, satisfying a growing need to be unapologetic for unapologetic commentary in an era that demanded both laughter and a critical examination of the political landscape.
Anyways, it's funny, and I made a special effort to come on the show today because I have privately, amongst my friends, and also in occasional newspapers and television shows, mentioned this show as being bad. And I felt that wasn't fair, and I should come here and tell you that it's not so much that it's bad as it's hurting America. So I wanted to come here today and say, here's just what I wanted to tell you guys.
Yeah.
Stop. Stop hurting America.
Okay, now
and come work for us, because we, as the people.
How do you pay?
The people, not well.
Better than CNN, I'm sure.
But you can sleep at night. See, the thing is, we need your help. Right now you're helping the politicians and the corporations, and we're left out there to mow our lawns.
You just said we're too rough on them when they make mistakes.
No, you're not too rough on them. You're part of their strategies. You're partisan, hacks.
And with John rising in the ranks, with him rose others, adapting and growing the style of the form. In 2004, Baumgartner and Morris did an experiment leading up to the presidential election on 732 college students, the most likely section of the population to view The Daily Show at the time. The students were divided into two groups. The first group watched selected clips of coverage of the two presidential frontrunners, making fun of them, doing impressions of them, and hearing them ridiculed in front of people on a studio audience. The second group viewed clips also about the election, but from balanced pieces from CBS Evening News. Both clips focused on images that the frontrunners had made for themselves, both positive and negative. At the end of viewing their assigned pieces, the students received a questionnaire. Even if the Daily Show viewers knew a little bit more about politics than non-viewers, there are still some negative consequences as well. According to Baumgartner's and Morris's research, young Americans were exposed to the Daily Show's political comedy, which resulted in a decrease in support for both presidential candidates and an increase in skepticism. A causal association was established by the experiment findings, and it was determined that the survey data that the relationship persists outside of the experiment environment. These conclusions are further supported by their study of national survey data from the Pew Research Center. This demonstrates how exposure to The Daily Show lowers young people's opinions of the presidential candidates, particularly those of lesser-known contenders. Allow me to introduce you to Bassem Youssef, a man whose wit and bravery have left a permanent mark on the world of political comedy. Hailing from Egypt, Youssef is often hailed as Jon Stewart of the Arab world. His journey into the limelight began during the Arab Spring, where his homemade YouTube videos mocking the political establishment garnered an immense following.
The most important value of satire, that it humanizes people in power, so you can stand against them.
Bassem Youssef was known as the Jon Stewart of Egypt, the host of the most popular television show in the history of the Arab world. A heart surgeon by training, Youssef was inspired by The Daily Show frontman to start a weekly show on YouTube in early 2011 from his own laundry room.
Being Hatni, I just said that you're inspiration to me, yes, thank you.
Just as the Egyptian Revolution and the Arab Spring were getting underway, Youssef mercilessly satirized the Islamists and then the military men who took power, and he caught fire.
Bassem Youssef, the most popular man in Egypt.
His show, which was called The Show, ended up drawing an audience of 30 million per episode. The backlash that followed is the subject of Youssef's new memoir, Revolution for Dummies, and the documentary Tickling Giants, which is directed by Sarah Taxler, a senior producer for The Daily Show. The book and film tell the story of Youssef's rise as a cultural icon of the Arab world, only to be censored and driven out of Egypt. His downfall began with a viral segment mocking President Mohamed Morsi's hat in 2013. In March, a warrant was issued for his arrest for insulting the president and Islam.
Does satire get you into trouble?
I'll tell you this, it doesn't get me into the kind of trouble it gets you into.
The jester's privilege ran out, with Jon Stewart personally flying him to the U.S. for safety. The powers of satire had become a force to be reckoned with. Stepping into the shoes of Jon Stewart as the host of Last Week Tonight was John Oliver, who brought his British charm and incisive humor to American audiences with a knack for dissecting complex issues. Oliver tackled everything from net neutrality to the refugees crisis, using his platform to inform and entertain simultaneously. The overlap between comedy and journalism was beginning to appear, both expanding what it means to be a comedian and blurring the lines between truth and humor for the audience. As different satirists, especially more and more of the Daily Show's correspondents, continued to expand into their own shows, doing parody after parody of traditional news, the viewership and interaction with politically charged comedy was soaring, and nothing could stop this trajectory. Oh God.
If this morning you finally woke up from a coma, well, you might want to go back.
I've noticed two shifts, like not just with teaching comedy and working with my students, but also, in terms of how people have been discussing political satire post-Trump, and what does that mean? I'd say for the shows themselves and forms of media, you're seeing a real struggle where there's this discussion of how can we satirize something, because with comedy, again, you're relying on some form of resemblance, but there also is incongruity. There's still some unexpected twist or difference between the original event and the spin that you are placing on it, making an unexpected parallel, or taking someone's words and just upping the outrageousness of that phrasing, right? And people have seen that as a struggle now, and some script writers and showrunners have talked about that. It's difficult when people see the rhetoric or what is going on politically as already outside the bounds of realism, or is already taking on this outrageous quality in terms of what the statements that people are making. There was seen as already such a level of caricature or exaggeration to Trump as a figure. How do you satirize that? How do you add this kind of twist or additional component of like surrealism? So I think that that's certainly a struggle for them, because you see that right now it's just repetition. Let's just repeat what was said at, this hearing for Justice Kavanaugh or for some of these other events. So that's been a struggle. I would say with my students, I see a shift in that, the students will openly talk about how they're feeling such anxiety over the polarization in today's society and over this kind of undercurrent of potential violence, that often they're getting drawn to more what they see as their sort of like very surrealist or fantastic humor, kind of more absurdist humor. I've been noting a shift where my earlier students said, well, that's dumb, or they really weren't drawn to that. They preferred more dry humor. I'm definitely sensing that shift, and some of them will openly say, I'm really liking this absurdism because I just need something cheerful. I just need this kind of sense of pure escape, and this playfulness and this sense of fantasy. So I have noticed that as an interesting shift that seems to be getting more appreciated now, that what is real is past the point of parody. It's like we're going into this fantasy realm now.
As the show gained traction, it couldn't have found a more fitting time to flourish than during the Trump era. The Trump presidency, with its unprecedented twists and turns, provided a treasure trove of material for comedians. John Oliver, with his unique style, emerged as a voice that not only made us laugh, but also forced us to confront uncomfortable truths. In an era marked by political polarization and a 24/7 news cycle, Oliver's deep dives and comedic analysis became a guiding light, navigating the audience through the murky waters of American politics with a blend of humor and harsh-hitting critique. It became a phenomenon where people were so willing to believe whatever he said was genuine news. Because of his accent, that was a new term coined specifically for him.
Much not last week, tonight. It's something that has kind of perennially happening always.
So are you aware of this thing called the John Oliver effect? Okay, let me just read you a couple things before you groan.
Yeah.
A month after your story on bail, New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio announced he will ease policies for low-level offenders. That's one.
Okay.
After your rant on U.S. territory rights, a judge cited the episode in her court decision on a class action case brought by Guam citizens over a tax refund. And this is my last one.
Yeah.
Your famous net neutrality segment got the public to react so strongly, John, it crashed the FCC web. So, does this...
I've crashed the website. I crashed the whole web.
The website.
The whole web went down. Yeah.
You know what I mean. But is it intimidating to you, or is it something you said, I can't wait to get in there?
No, because I ignore all of that. So the ripple effect after the show has nothing to do with us. Once we've done the show, we're finished. And I would argue that we had very little to do with any of those things. I think there were some of those things we were, like bail, I think was in the process of changing, and we were just shining a light on the problems towards the end of that process.
But you're shining a light on the absurd public policy, some absurd public policy.
Well, there are a lot of absurd public policies to shine lights on.
Yeah.
So yes, that is generally what we look towards, is things that have not been covered too much, but that are inherently ridiculous.
So
and then might view their comedy just as an art form. And there's been, recent discussions of whether or not comedy is supposed to be strictly true, and whether or not comedy is supposed to be replacing journalism. And most comedians say that it's not. It's an art form that's primarily designed to have the effect of making the audience enjoy their time watching. And if that's the primary directive or the primary goal, then that kind of changes the way that we should view it in terms of a source of information or a source of news. But oftentimes the comedian is not thinking about the material in the same way that the audience is. And sometimes audiences could be thinking of the material as being their source of news, especially when you get into these programs like John Oliver or Jon Stewart, who are very much focused on reporting factual information in the news. Sometimes it can give the appearance of being actual news, which oftentimes it's not. It's still entertainment, still comedy.
It's interesting. I guess to me, the most important thing is that, that the public is able to differentiate between traditional journalism, which is held to higher standards of fact finding and sourcing and editorial balance and so forth, to distinguish between that and satire or other forms of entertainment. And so I think it's not, for me, I wouldn't say that it's important to hold satirists to the same standards as journalists. It's just to figure out ways to distinguish between the two. And I think this is a challenge for a lot of Americans who don't follow news closely, don't pay attention to politics. Again, that is the typical American, somebody that doesn't have much political knowledge and doesn't follow it regularly. If they flip on the TV or flip through their social media feeds or whatever, and they see, as a short video or, a meme or something, how do they interpret that? Do they think that it's actually news? It might not even be intended to be news. So, I mean, I think that to me is the concerning thing, that there are a lot of particularly younger people that are turning to social media as their primary news source. And what we know about that so far from surveys, especially from the Pew Research Center, is that these are people that they don't have as much knowledge about politics as people who get their news from from newspapers or TV news or other sources, radio. So I guess that's my concern. It's just that that people are being exposed to information they might think is intended to be factual, when it's either A, satire, or B, it's intentionally misleading. So, I don't know exactly what the remedy is for that, but I don't think that the answer is to, try to impose different standards on satirists, because part of what makes that genre work is that they aren't, bound by the same sorts of guardrails that journalists are. They're not, they don't have to worry about being sued for libel and slander and things like that. So I wouldn't want to change that, but I do worry that people aren't differentiating between journalism and entertainment or comedy.
Maybe if you hold them to the same standard, then you lose part of the magic of the comedy. And so, part of the magic of the comedy is the freedom to be able to, make fun of a situation, maybe to be able to exaggerate certain elements of it, maybe to not tell the full story in order to make your point. And that all allows for comedy to be successful. Because if you incorporated all this nuance and both sides of the story and all of the, the full picture, it kind of ruins the delivery of the punchline. But the downside of that, of course, is then you aren't getting that nuance in the full picture. And you might get that in traditional journalism. So there's definitely some pros and cons. It might be more engaging without all of that detail, but then of course it might not be a full, accurate, truthful picture of the entire issue.
I certainly see a benefit to, requiring, or at least audiences expecting, comedians engaged in these specific, satire shows and formats. If they are going to be, covering news events or, portraying, or at least presenting themselves as a research-oriented program. I would say, like Last Week Tonight with John Oliver often emphasizes the research involved for the team that is working on those pieces. I do think for that reason it is useful for at least for them to get kind of audience feedback, sort of, responses if they're not, if there is misinformation or if there is something that is incorrect. I think in terms of how you would implement those standards gets to be a bit tricky or dicey because they're not sort of on a main news network for the most part. So how you would implement that, I think you really would just have to have an audience feedback loop as a form of accountability. I think that one potential downside to having that effect or to expecting the comedy shows to have the same amount of kind of research and responsibility as a standard news network is I do think that if audiences are already relying on those shows as their main form of news, I think that it could create kind of further slippage or confusion of thinking that that is just a normal kind of journalist news outlet and there is absolutely no difference or distinction. So I think that could get a bit dicey because a lot of them aren't trained in journalism or have not, gone through certain, aspects of that training. So I think that could create some problematic slippage. But I do think that if audiences are already watching them sort of with this assumption, and I think if they are going to foreground the research to such an extent and kind of advertise that as part of their model, then I do think there should be certain expectations of the quality of their work.
As we conclude our journey through the world of political satire, it becomes evident that laughter is not merely a matter of amusement. It is a potent force, a tool that can both unite and divide. Enlighten and obscure, the ethical ramifications of political satire linger in the air, prompting us to reflect on the power these comedians wield and the impact their words have on the tapestry of public opinions. In the realm of satire, where humor intertwines with critique, we are faced with a delicate balance. The laughter evoked by satire is not without consequence. It reverberates through the corridors of power, resonates in the minds of viewers, and as we've seen, can even shape the trajectory of social and political movements. Satirists, those modern jesters wielding wit and wisdom, bear the weight and ethical consideration. The fine line they tread between humor and consequence is illuminated. As we've explored controversies, confronted ethical dilemmas, and witnessed the evolution of satirical techniques, one theme echoes. Navigating the complex landscape where laughter meets accountability is one that should not be taken lightly. There is no set answer here. The choice to separate facts from comedy is subjective and case by case. Within the world of comedy and entirely outside the world of journalism lies a very unique role in the political satirist. The ethical landscape of political satire demands our attention. Satirists hold a mirror to society, reflecting its flaws, absurdities, and triumphs. Yet they must also be mindful of the impact their reflections have on the collective consciousness. The consequences of their words extend beyond the punchline, reverberating through public opinion, influencing discourse, and shaping the fabric of our democratic ideals. As we part ways, let us carry with us a newfound awareness of the ethical undercurrents beneath the surface of satire. Let us engage with humor critically, recognizing its potential to enlighten and provoke, but also acknowledging its weight in shaping our perspectives. In this world of laughter and critiques, we find not only entertainment, but a call to responsibility. The jesters of our time are not exempt from the consequences of their jests. So as we bid farewell to the world of political satire, may we carry forward the commitment to laughter with conscience, knowing that in the arena of ideas, every punchline carries with it the weight of ethical ramifications and the potential to mold the ever-shifting landscape of public opinion.